video, we will be manipulating the data a little bit and we will be creating what are called new variables. So let me explain just a little bit. As you have seen from class and from working with this data set, you know that we are working with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We're working with 7 behavioral variables for this data set. So for example, engagement would be considered a variable. Now if you look at the data that you actually have, what you'll actually see is a series of questions that corresponds to this idea of engagement. Here you have a series of questions that deals with this idea of opportunities for growth, right? So you have a series of questions that connect back to these variables of interest, okay? Now, what this is called is, it's called a latent construct. So the latent construct of these 10 questions, the latent construct is opportunities for growth. The latent construct for these 21 questions is engagement, right? So the overall picture of what we're trying to get is engagement. We're measuring that using 21 questions. You might think about this almost like a personality profile or something like that you've taken, or maybe StrengthsFinder or one of those sort of things, right? The underlying issue is sort of one thing, your personality. That's just one aspect of it, right? That's one thing, but you're asked a battery of questions to get at that one thing, right? That one thing is called the latent construct. Whoops. And that latent construct is something that can't be measured directly, so we measure it using a series of questions, right? So that's why we do that. Now, what we're interested in when it comes to these numbers is not really how people answered on each individual question. So each individual question here, we're not that interested in how person number 1 answered on all of the individual questions. It is interesting to us for a couple of specific purposes, which we'll talk about later, but by and large, we're really more interested in the overall score that this person got. Now there's a couple different ways to do this. You'll notice here that there are some participants who don't have complete data, right? You see little holes, little missing pieces all over the place, and that's okay. Often when you have a data set that you're working with, you'll have missing data, and there's a couple different ways that you can handle that. So one way is to actually replace each score with an average score. So this would take some advanced statistical software to do this properly and to not make mistakes. But one thing that you could do is you could say, let's replace this score that's missing with the average of the other scores that this person described, right? So this person, it looks like 4, 4, 4, 4, 4. So we could assume that this person would have scored 4 and 4 and even 4 here. We could assume that. Or we could also say that for this individual question, question number 8, we could take the average score of question number 8 for the entire sample that we have, and we could input that average score there. That's not really my preference. I really don't. I prefer to just leave them alone. But what it does is it can sort of impact the overall score that you get. Okay, so let's look into this. I have done an example for you already in the data set that you have, and I'm going to show you my preferred way of doing this. My preferred way is to use the average score, and you'll see here's an example of why I would prefer to use the average score rather than a total score, a sum score. We could also do that, okay? You see here that this person, participant number 16, it looks like, something like that, has scored 2 and 2 on these 2 questions that measure turnover, okay? So the average, of course, is 2. This person, on the other hand, skipped a question, answered 2 on the next question, so their average score is also 2. The other way to do this would be as if we computed total scores, right? So 1 plus 1 is 2, 1 plus 1 is 2, 4 plus 3 is 7, right? So you would go down and compute total scores. Now what would happen in this case is that this person would say 2 plus 2 is 4, but 0 plus 2 is 2. So this person compared to this person is going to have a much lower score. And while that may be true, this person may have skipped that because of some negative thing, it negatively impacts the total score that you could get, right? So as it is now, we're treating these two as equal. So this person gets a 2 and this person gets a 2. If we use total scores, this person would get a 4 and this person would get a 2. And although that's okay, it's okay to do that. My preference is to use the average score instead. Okay, so let me show you how to do that if you're not familiar with how to do that in Excel. We're going to make a new column. So we'll click on the column that comes next. We'll say Insert. And you'll see that it's coded the right color for us already. I'm going to go to this box up here and I'm going to call it, this is Opportunities for Growth, so I'll call it Opportunities for Growth Average. You could call it whatever you wanted. If you wanted to call it something else, you're welcome to do that. And of course, the way to do an average, we'll use a formula, so =, average. I just start typing average and this pops up for me. So =, average. And then I'm going to take it and select these numbers, just the one row. So the average of column I through R, hit enter, and that's my average. Now, to get this to populate all the way down, I can simply drag this box all the way down. Okay, so that's great. I have my average scores. I just need to do that for the rest of them, right? So what I would do is I would go to my next variable. I would insert another column here, and I would call this engagement average. Okay, so or E or ENG or whatever you want to call it, engagement average. Okay, and I would do the same thing. So =, average. Drag that all the way across, hit enter, and that's great. So 4.95, that's pretty high for that person. Drag that all the way down, and I would continue going on and on and on. Okay, just for clarity, what you might want to do is in this column, if you select the column, you can actually then reduce the, oops, I guess it's picking up the text here. You can reduce the decimal, okay? And for me, that's a little bit nicer. So I typically reduce it to about 2. 2 is plenty. It gives you some good good granularity on the number itself, but it's not too overwhelming. So I reduce it to 2. I would do the same thing here again. Select the numbers and reduce that down to 2. Okay, so that's what I would do with those. Now the other thing that you might want to do is you may want to then, because we're not necessarily working with all of these numbers, what you may want to do is hide these columns. So it just might be a little bit easier for you to sort of work with this data. So if you just select these columns and go to, let's see if I remember exactly. If you go to Format, Column, Hide, it then hides the columns for you. So they're still there, right? We haven't deleted them. We could delete them, but then it would delete our average here, right? We haven't deleted them, and we can always bring them back just by clicking. Okay, we can always look back and see where they are. But that might just that might help you a little bit to just sort of see everything in a little more simple fashion. So again, I would just select these. I would do Format, Column, Hide. And if you do that, Format, Column, Hide, what you're going to end up doing is you're going to reduce this down to just a few columns that aren't going to go all the way across like this does. So that's one good way to just get a very, very succinct view of the data that you're working with without losing the actual data. So again, you could delete it, but then you would have to compute these scores and then convert them to static text and then delete your columns, and it's just too much of a fuss. So this is one good way to do this. Okay, now that you do, and once you've done this, what I want you to do is I want you to save this file as it is. Okay, so you're going to save the file, and then you're going to save it in a different format. So you're going to have you are going to have a couple of different file formats here. So we're going to do Save As, and I want you to save it as a CSV, a comma delimited file, CSV. Okay, so save it as a comma delimited file. When you do that, it's going to say, hey, this is going to take away some features here. Are you sure you want to do that? And you're going to say yes. So when you hit save, use that already, so we'll replace. This is probably what you'll see. Some features in your workbook might be lost if you save this as a CSV file. Do you want to keep using the format? Yes, I do. Okay, now we're going to use that later, so don't worry about it now. But what you should have at this point, once you're finished, you should have 7 columns, of course, with each corresponding to a single score for each of these variables, and then of course your demographic variables here.